All right, if you're here to learn how to build Rally apps and extend our platform with JavaScript, you are in the right spot. In this video, we're going to take the app we built from the last session, session number 3. We're going to convert our basic grid of stories into an interactive grid of defects. My name is David Thomas. I'm a systems engineer on the sales team here at Rally Software. If you're wondering if I surf out in my hometown of Santa Cruz, that would be a negative. Look up the red triangle. There are a lot of sharks out here. That's just my perspective. Anyway, so why are you here? Why am I here? So as a Rally customer, you want to be comfortable extending our platform, the Rally platform, to provide your business with unique insights into your own data. For this entire video series, I have some acceptance criteria here. And for today, we're going to focus on number 4, which is getting comfortable trying, failing, debugging, and learning. We're going to be doing a lot of coding today. In this screenshot, on the left is the grid that we created in the last session. It's a basic grid of stories. We use a store to query the artifacts out of Rally, the stories out of Rally, put them into a grid, and choose some columns to show. On the right is an interactive grid of defects. This is what we're going to build today. We're going to query defects. We're going to have filters for iteration and for severity. How are we going to get there? 6 steps. First, we're going to change our store to query defects. Second, we're going to add a filter for iterations. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to add another filter for severity and show how we can build complex filters. The fourth thing is we're going to play with the layout a little bit so we get those filters to line up nicely, the pull downs to line up nicely across the top. The fifth thing is we're going to focus on reusing the grid. It's very common to get in a situation where whenever you create a new query and create a grid, it'll just add grids and append grids to your view. We want to we want to create a mechanism that reuses a single grid. And the sixth thing is we're going to apply a little bit of cosmetics to lay things out, make it look pretty before we ship it. With that, let's get to coding. So as I mentioned before, I like to start my app development at developer.rallydev.com. I like to open up the SDK documentation and also open up the developer tools in Chrome and choose my terminal so I have access to local file access. So I want to get some code, and like any good developer, we try not to start from scratch. We want to get something that's existing. So I'm going to go over to GitHub and grab the Getting Started, Rally Community Getting Started. This is all the slides and code for all of the sessions, and I actually want to get this one called Session 3 Basic Grid. The beauties of editing video after the fact. So it came to my attention after releasing the video that there was some confusion around which repository to pull the code down and push changes back up. Now obviously in the video I'm using the Getting Started repository under Rally Community, and that's sort of the gold standard, right? So we don't want to have everyone pushing their changes up to there. So instead, individually, what you want to do in order to follow the commands through the video, the git commands, the first thing you want to do is you want to fork this repository. So go ahead and fork it, and you want to create a copy of that in your own GitHub repository. So in this case, I'll choose David Thomas, and that's going to go ahead and create a copy under, you'll see it'll say David Thomas in this case, Getting Started, or your name / Getting Started, as opposed to using the one that's in Rally Community. And then from here, you'll see there's the, on the lower right, here's the URL to clone. So it'll have your personal copy of Getting Started. Hope that helps and eliminates all of the confusion with using Git and being able to store the changes for your apps, the changes that you're making for your app in this video. Thanks. So I'm going to go over here on the right, grab the Git URL, and basically my local machine, let's just go to temp, git clone and paste in that URL. Now that I have everything down, I should have a directory called Getting Started. And in there I have session 3. And in here I have my basic Rally grid. And then lastly, finally, this is the source code from the actual grid itself. Now I want to make sure I do a quick build, Rally app builder build. And this will make sure I have just I have my app debug file and then the deploy file, sort of compile it, make sure I have all the right files there. So next thing I want to do is I want to open up my the debug file, so I have a file that I can test my changes. So let's do in Mac, I can do open app debug. That'll create me a new new tab. Then I usually like to come in and turn on my JavaScript console to see debugging in there. Okay, so here we are. This is our list of stories, our grid of stories that we started with. So if we go back and look at what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on so if we go back and take a look at our path, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to query defects instead of stories. Okay, so how do we do that? So let's open up our app.js file. This is the app that we left off with. Now let's take a quick overview of what we have here. At the top, we're defining our app. Our app is it's a JavaScript object, a bunch of name-value pairs. It extends the Rally app. So we get a whole bunch of stuff for free infrastructure-wise. We're basically adding our own unique things on top. We've defined our launch function. This is what gets called when the app is ready to fire off. In our app, we created a method called load data. We called it at launch, and this load data went and created a store. It got user stories. When it went out to fetch those user stories, it would come back with the data and call this load listener and call this function. And when it got that data, we sent it to go call load grid. Remember, we passed in scopes. We have access to the app level. So at the app level, we can call load grid. So at the app level, we have a function called load grid. It took a store, and we created a grid, gave it the store with the data, and we said what columns to show of that data. And then we, at the app level, we added the grid to the app. Remember that the app with this, at the highest level here, this represents the app, and the app is a container. We can put stuff in it, and the app will just light that up and show it. So that's what we have. Our first thing is to change this to be to query defects. Let's go to load data. Actually, I'll change this to just be our second app. Let's go to our store here, load data. I'm going to simply just change this to query defect. Most of this should be the same because it's just a store. So load my data, call the grid with a store. It's all generically named. Now we have to be careful with the fetch here because these columns need to match what is available in a defect. So what is available in a defect? Well, let's go in our SDK docs. There's a link to the web service API. Let's open that up. If we scroll down on the left, we have defect. And in defect, here are all the fields that are available that you can query. Now, I happen to know that I want to grab severity and iteration, because those are the pull downs. Okay. So there's our store. When that store loads, it'll call the grid, load grid. Load grid is going to create a grid with the defects and show these columns. Now, this is going to have to change here too. We're going to want to show severity and iteration. Let's get rid of this debug. Okay, and then we'll add the grid. So that should be good. So let's go over to our debug area. Command R to refresh, and it was a list of stories. Is now a list of defects. Defect formatted IDs, the names, severities, and the iterations. Perfect. So let's go take a look at our list of things to do. We did number one, defects instead of stories. That's done. The second thing now is let's focus on iterations. How do we create an iteration pull down? So let's go look at the API docs. And I like to go into the gear menu and look at all of the widgets that are available to us. If you scroll down, there's one called, in the combo boxes, there's one called a Rally UI combo box iteration combo box. Now it turns out that this is actually a fairly simple object thanks to all the awesomeness of Rally engineers. There's basically very little config necessary. Now keep in mind that because look at if you look on the right, the object model for this component, it's pretty extensive. And if you look at like the number of configs that are available, 180, way too many. At the because we're at the sort of the leaf node, I tend to turn off the inherited filter. And now you can see there's only 6. And this means that there are 6 configs at this class level. The ones that these are the ones that the Rally engineers have added. So it turns out none of these are really particularly needed for this case. So we're going to go ahead and just build a basic iteration combo box. The example here, they use this X type. and they use the short name. And if you look on the top, here's the short name up here. And that's a way to sort of dynamically build up these objects when they're needed. It's kind of a quick way to do it if you want. I'm going to stick with sort of the longhand division way and use the full name with the full X syntax just to be consistent. But over time, you may move over to the X-type way too. So where do we want to build this thing? Well, if we look at our code, what I'm going to do is we're not going to load data yet because we don't have our iterations. So we're going to create a new method called load iterations. And then I'll add a new method. And remember, this is, and the syntax can be a little weird. It took me a little while to get used to it, but load iterations, this is just a property, a name value property on the app itself. Right? Remember I said JavaScript objects are name value pairs. The name is called load iterations, and the value is a function that takes no parameters. Inside that function is where we're going to create our combo box. So how do we create things? Well, down below, let's look at this example here, x.create. So x.create, the long name, looking at the top in the docs, rally.ui.combobox.iteration combo box. And it takes a set of configurations as an object and braces. I'm not going to give it any right now. Now I actually want to do something with this, so I'm actually going to put this into a variable. I'll call it iter combo box. And once I have that created, it's not going to show anything. I actually need to add it to the app. So I'll say this, which is my app, .add iter combo box. Okay. So we should call launch. Launch calls load iterations. Load iterations creates a combo box and adds it. Let's go test that out. Along the top, we now have a pull down with iterations. The Rally engineers have done all the magic behind the scenes to put the names, the dates, even selects the one that's current active today as the default. All that for just a couple lines of code, which is pretty sweet. All right, so now we actually want to do something with this. That's where the events come in. Now the events, let's go look at the docs again. All right, what events do we want? Well, let's look at our, so the first event we want is when this loads, we want to get the iteration and go tell the grid to filter stories for the selected default iteration. So if we look at in the docs, there's actually an event. Now there's no custom events at this level. They're actually inherited. There are 44 of them, but there's one called ready. Fires when the combo box has been rendered and its data has an initial value. So this is the one we're going to hook into. So remember, for event handlers, there's a configuration option called listeners. Okay, and listeners is an object that contains one or more event handlers to be added to the object during initialization. And those are the methods that are going to fire when the event kicks off. So the syntax to that is, it's a configuration property of the component here. So listeners, and it is an object according to the documentation. So we'll give it the object notation. And in here, we're going to put the names of the events we want to listen on. Now remember, the event that we want is ready. And actually you can filter that. Here's another way to do it. You can look for ready. And there's the ready one, so you can get to the docs. And ready is going to be a function that passes a combo box and some other options which I don't care about. So it's a function that's going to give me the combo box. So what I'll do now is I'll simply do a console log, say ready, and combo box. Now, let's get that far. Command 2, refresh. Here we go, ready, and now we have a combo box. Okay. So once we have a combo box, we actually want to get the value that's selected, right? And it turns out that there is a method. Let's show inherited. There we are. Get record. If I look at record, it says get the record for the currently selected value, and it returns a model, like an instance of the record. So what I can do is I can say console.log chosen one, combo box.get record, and that is going to print out the actual selected record. Command 2, Command R. So chosen one is a record. How do I know that? If I look at Proto, for example, it says it's an iteration, which is I'm selecting an iteration. If I look at raw, for example, I can see all the raw data for the iteration. So start dates, the name, end date, and also this thing called a ref, which is going to be important. That's the unique identifier for this. So what we want to do is we want to pluck out the actual ref itself. So what I can do now is on the model, let me show you how, just demystify this for a second. Get record returns a model. So let's go take a look at model. And model's just wrapping, right? It's just another object that's wrapping the data here. And there's a method here called get. It says return the value for the given field name. So if you give it a string name, it'll give you the value. So the method called get on model. So get record is the model.get, and we want to get out the underscore ref. We saw the ref from the data that was printed out. Command 2, Command R. We're looking for a ref in the console, and boom, chosen one, and it's this reference, the object ID for my iteration. Perfect. So we have the actual data. So I'm going to clean this up. Let's get a variable here. Var selected iteration, so iter ref equals that. Okay, so we have the actual data that was selected. Now this is where we're going to have to, I'm going to just share a pattern for how to lay things out. Now I could take this ref and I could call this dot load data and give it the selected iter ref, right? And then come down here to load data, and I could say iter ref, right? And I could sort of pass it through. It's going to get challenging when we have multiple pull downs. Okay, so I want to take a step just for a second here and show you another way to get access to what was selected. So I'm going to call load data from here, but I'm going to get rid of choosing what was selected. I'm not going to do that just yet. Okay, and also remember, because we want to call load data on the app, this currently is going to be a combo box. We actually want to pass in scope. So at the app level, when we create the combo box, we pass in a reference to the app, so then the iteration combo box gets a reference to the app. So we're going to call load data. And load data down here is where we actually want to get that. We actually want to get what was selected. Okay. Console.log selected iter. Okay. But now we need a reference to the combo box. How do we get a reference to the combo box? Well, there's a couple different ways to do that. I'm going to show you one easy way, which is when we create the combo box, if you create any component, we're simply going to put a reference to that at the app level. We can do that very simply up here by rechanging this. When we create the combo box, I'm going to simply say this.iter combo box. So I'm creating a brand new property on my app at the top level by saying this.iter combo box and set it equal to the combo box itself. So now it's kind of like global at the app level. So now down in load data, I can access that by simply saying this dot, and I have to get the same name up here, iter combo box. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. Oh, iter combo box is not defined. Oh, why is that? Where was it being called? App.js, line 27. Line 27. Oh, ha! So when we created the combo box, it's now an attribute of the app. So I have to always reference it at that level. So even down here when I say, let's go ahead and add it, I'd say this.iter combo box. Let's refresh. selected iteref is not defined. Oh, typo. Here's that debugging again. Selected iteref. Okay, there we go. Selected iteration is the, there's the actual iteration reference. So what we've done is we've registered the combo box at the app level. And now when we call load data, we don't pass it anything. Load data will go back out and say, oh, I'll go find what was selected up there. So now that I have a ref, we want to filter the store, so that the store only fetches defects that match a particular iteration. So let's go back to our docs and look up Wasabi data store. So here's the object I want to look up, the Wasabi data store. And in there, in the examples, it turns out there's actually an example of filters, how to filter stuff on the server side. So it's just another attribute like listeners, filters. And it's an array of one or more filters. I give it an object, and the object is property, and it's going to be the iteration. There's operator. It doesn't show it on the example, but because equal is default, but I like to show it longhand sort of. And then value is going to be our selected iteref. Okay. So we've added a filter that gets sent to the server. Command 2, Command R. This should be filtering by iteration. And there we go. Iteration 6 is the default one that's loaded, and it's querying the iterations there, defects for iteration 6. Now there's one more thing I want to do, which is when we actually change the pull down, nothing happens because that's a different event, right? The first event was just ready, when it's ready. We actually want to do it when the user selects it. Also have the same effect. So if we go back to our iteration combo box, under listeners, we want to add another listener here. And the listener we want, if we go to iteration combo box, and look under events, there's one called select. Fires when at least one item is selected. And this will return a combo box and the records. So it turns out we're not going to need that because of the way we set up our app, but I'm going to create a reference to select, and it's going to be a function. It gives me a combo box and records. But I could get access to that data and pass it along and all that good stuff, but instead I'm just going to call load data again, because load data is going to go get what it needs as opposed to giving what it needs. And that should be it. So Command 2, Command R. So we've registered another event. Ooh. Oh, forgot a comma. So now we have two events registered on ready and then also on select. So if I choose iteration 5, it should create, down below it's creating a new grid with just the ones that are iteration 5. If I go back and select iteration 6, you'll see I've got another grid that has just iteration 6. Step 5 of our app, we're going to fix this so it doesn't keep creating new ones. But so it's actually neat, you can see the problem. But here what we've done is we've added our iteration drop-down box with our two event listeners, and it goes and filters defects and gives them to the grid. So that was kind of long, but we're introducing a lot of stuff here. So just as a recap, right, we called a new method load iterations, we created a combo box, we gave it two listeners, on ready and when it gets selected. Both of those just call a very simple method called load data. The way we set this up is instead of sending things to load data will go out and get them because it can get access to the combo box at the app level. And then on the store, we added a filter. So we're querying defects, automatically loading the store, and we're applying a filter that matches iterations. And that satisfies number 2. All right, for the next one, step 3, we're going to add a severity pull down to filter by severity. Now, this one should be a lot easier because we have some of the infrastructure set up because of all the work we did with iteration. So we want another pull down for severity. Now it turns out, well, we need to find the widget. Okay, so let's go back to look at what's available for us. Now it turns out we want to use a combo box, a drop-down combo box called field value combo box. And what this is going to do is this is going to, if we give it a model, in this case, in our case, defect, and the field of, say, severity, it's going to give us a list of those severities. So let's go ahead and, using the longhand notation, let's use this example in our code. So what are we going to do here? So we're going to load iterations. That's just fine. We still want to do that. We want to add a new method called load severities. It's a function. It takes no parameters yet that we know of. And here we're going to, it is our longhand notation. And keep in mind, we're also going to, just like we added the combo box to the top level app, we're going to do the same thing here, same pattern. So we're going to say this dot severity combo box is equal to x dot create rally.ui.combobox.field value combo box. It takes a configuration object, which is empty at the moment. We need to add model, looking at the docs up here, model and field. Model is defect, field is severity, and this is the field that comes out of the Wasapi docs. And then looking at the example above, we'll add listeners in a second, but let's go ahead and just add it and see what we get. This dot add, so at the app level add the app level's severity combo box. Since we added it to the app with this dot, we have to reference it as this dot down here. But we're not calling this method yet. So where do we want to call it from? Well, let's load iterations, and when the load iterations are done, right, when it's ready, then we'll go load severities. So let's just put that one up here. Just call this dot load severities. Remember the underscore in the front is just a convention to say it's kind of an internal private method, if you will. Command 2, Command R. We should hopefully have a severity pull down. Hey, look at that. So iterations loaded. Once they were done, when they were ready, we call severity, and now we have our defect severities listed here. Now it's not pretty yet because they stack on top, but we'll fix that in the final step, or I think the next step actually. But for now, we have severities loaded. So what do we do now? Well, we want to have listeners so that when the severities load, we go load the grid. Now that we have iterations and severities, we can go load the grid. So same deal, under events, this field value combo box, like others, is going to have a ready. It fires when the combo box is rendered and has initial value. So we can actually kind of steal some code, if you will. Let's go up to our iteration combo box and steal the whole listeners block. It turns out they're going to be very similar. So let's just copy the whole kit and caboodle. Bang. Go down here, and it's just another property, listeners. Listeners is an object. There's a ready property with a function that gets called when it's ready. When this one's ready, we're going to call load data. Also, when we select it, we'll call load data. Let's give that a shot. Now you'll notice that the iteration combo box, when it's ready, right? Think about when it's firing up and initializing. When the first pull down's ready, we'll initialize the second pull down. When the second pull down is ready, we'll go and load the data. And that makes sense. But now once the app's alive and you actually change the values, right? We don't want to go and load other combo boxes. Rather, if we change the values, we want to go and just load the grid. So that's why when the user selects something, we call load data for both cases. But when the iteration combo box is ready, that's when we daisy chain to the initialization for severity. So hopefully that makes sense why we did that. Clean this up. So both of those should be wired up. Command 2, Command R. We should be fully wired up. And there we go. If I change the iteration to iteration 5, we get our second grid down there. We'll fix that later, but it has iteration 5 stuff. If I choose new filter for severity, it will load, but we haven't wired up the severity value yet. What it's doing is just going and requerying what it knows about the iteration. So let's go ahead and let's wire up severity down in the grid. So same deal up here. In load data, we currently go and sniff out the selected iteration. Let's copy that and get the selected severity value. So we created a severity combo box. Now we got to be a little careful here because this one might be a little different. So with this one, we should still be able to get record, but what we have to be careful about is what we're getting here. So let's actually print this out. Just want to be real careful how far we get with this. Console.log selected severity. Let's see exactly what we get back. If we select one of these, selected severity, here's one here, and it's raw data. Notice it has name and value. It doesn't have a ref, okay? It's just a string value, so we want to get the actual value of what's there. That's kind of the tricky part, but so we'll do record.get value. Okay, now we have a string. Why do we need a string? Because we're going to pass that string into the store and for what to filter on. Okay, so let's go to the store. Let's add a filter, another filter. Let's copy these 5 lines. It's another object, so comma between severity equals selected severity. I'm going to actually call it value because it's not a ref. So let's rename. Oh, I did call it value up here. Okay. So load data goes and sniffs out both combo boxes, getting the selected values. We'll print them out for good measure. We go to the store and we add 2 different filters there. Command 2, Command R. So let's see, none found. So let's go major. Okay, so we have, look at here, severity major, iteration 6, which matches up along the top. If we do minor, there are no minors in iteration 6, but if we go to iteration 5, we actually have 2 minors in iteration 5. So at this point, we've successfully wired up both combo boxes, and we've sniffed the values out that are selected. We've wired up the events so that they trigger the initial grid loading as well as the user interaction, and we've changed the store to filter by those values. All right, so with the first 3 out of the way, let's focus on setting up the pull downs in a horizontal layout. Now we talked in the first video, one of the tips was about ext and the containers and the components. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create just a vanilla container, and we're going to put both pull downs inside of that container, and then we're going to tell the container how to lay out those components. So we're going to do it in kind of a sort of simple brute force way just to get the point across. So let's just let's focus in up on our launch method here. Get rid of that comment. Okay, so that's where we're going to put some code. Let's find out what to put. So I'm interested in a container, so I'm going to go ahead and just do a search for container. And you'll see just the first one here. First 2 actually are the same, but so here's a container class, and it says the base class for any component that may contain other components. So how do we create one? And there's a lot of things you can do here. Now this one's interesting here. So in this example, they're doing an X create of a container, which is what we're going to do exactly, and they're setting the layout to a type HBox, which turns out to be horizontal box. And if you do a search for HBox, you'll get information on a particular layout, which in and of itself has all sorts of configs and whatnot. But one thing that we're going to be interested in is this syntax here. So let me I'll just grab that and we'll go back to our container. Okay, so down in code, we're going to create a container. So x.create. I'm looking on the top there, x.container.container. Give it a configuration option or object, and then I'm going to paste in that layout information that we snagged. So type hbox align stretch. I'm not really sure what the line does. I'm sure with stretching it probably makes it fill the width. I'd have to look that up, but we'll just keep it in for now. It seems interesting. So now that I've created it, let's put it into a variable. Actually, no, we're going to stick this container on the app itself. So we're going to call it, say, this dot, and we'll just call it a pulldown container. We're going to set that container. So it's kind of like, like global on the app, so to speak, which means it can be accessed elsewhere in other functions without having to pass this thing in. So we've created it. We haven't really done anything to it. But one thing we do need to do is we need to add it. So this makes it a reference on the app, but we actually haven't put it into in the apps for its like rendering lifecycle. So what we need to do is we need to say this dot add. So to the app, we're going to add this dot pulldown container. Okay, at this point we've created an empty container. There's nothing inside of it. Nothing is even renderable inside of it, but the container is in the lifecycle of the app itself. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the two pulldowns. So in the load iterations here, we have our combo box. Now instead of adding it to the app at the top level, we're going to say this dot pulldown container dot add. Okay, so that's going to shove the iteration combo box inside of the pulldown container, and the pulldown container is already inside of the top level app. And then let's go down and do that again for the severities here. So this dot pulldown container dot add. That should be all we have to do. So let's switch over, do a refresh. Notice along the top we have our two pulldowns in a horizontal layout, which is very nice. Now what's interesting, once you start to look at what goes on behind the scenes, down in the debug tools, there's an element inspector, this little eyeglass thing. And you can actually mouse over. You can mouse over like the pull downs or even like the whole area here. So let's just do the whole section there and see what happens. And you can see down in the code, the actual HTML code that gets generated. There's a lot of generated stuff in here. But you can see that there's this idea of a container. So that whole block up there's a container. Let me just go to the actual pull down itself and see what shows up. Here you can see what's highlighted is the rally iteration combo box. Name, iteration, etc. So this is kind of an interesting way to kind of really see at the end of the day what X is doing to create the HTML that gets rendered in the browser. Is to use that inspection element. So you could, if you wanted to, you can go sniff through and really get an understanding of in the code. Back at our top here, creating this container and had we given it an ID, like for example, if we given it like a ID pull down container ID. And gone back and re-rendered that. Let's see if we can actually find it. But if I can do let's see, that's the element inspector. Let's do a find. I did Command F, so pull down container ID. Bingo, bingo, look at that right there, boom. ID. So that container generated an HTML div at the end of the day. Okay, and inside that div we have some the components that we've dropped in. And if you probably look kind of close, you'll see here's like the rally iteration combo box. Okay, we could dig down deeper and find the other one, but long story short, that's how you can figure out what this stuff is really doing, and that's pretty cool. From the code perspective, we created a container, we set its layout to be horizontal, and we added our iteration combo box to the container, and we added our severity combo box to the container. And that's all we had to do to get a nice layout. All right, so let's tackle number 5, the reusable grid. As you saw earlier, when we were adding the iteration pull down, in the original flow, if you change the pull down and it runs a new query, it'll create a new store and create a new grid, and it'll append a new grid down below, so you get this sort of a stacking of grids. So what we're going to do is we're going to rely on a nice symbiotic relationship between a store and a grid. And it goes like this. The moment you create a grid and you bind a store to it, if the data in the store changes, the grid knows that and it will automatically refresh itself. So you only need one store and one grid. You just have to build the code right that you only create them once, and then anytime you want to change things, you tell the store to change. Okay, and then implicitly the grid will change. So from a programmatic standpoint, all we have to do is control how to change the store. What's changing on the store? Well, it's the filters, the iterations that are being selected and the severities that are being selected. So we need to change, we need to pull the filter code out, because that will change, and we need to tell the store to reload itself and fetch new data based on the values of the filters. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go down to the store code and load data, store code. Now the first thing I want to do is I only want to create a store once. And in the same way with the pull downs, I may want to get access to it later. So I'm actually, instead of creating a local variable, I'm going to call it this dot, instead of my store, we'll call it a defect store. So now that store will be on the app itself. And I don't think I need to do anything else with that. Nope. Okay, so if I'm only creating it once, what I also want to do is I want to get these filters out. So let's take the filters out. And we're going to replace it with filters, my filters. Okay. And let's put the filter code up above. Let's stick it up here. And this is just going to be a variable, var my filters equals an array of filters. Okay. So the load data gets called, we pick out the filter data, we create an array of filters at that point in time, and now what we want to do is we want to wrap and make a decision. Do we have a store or not? If we don't have a store, let's create one for the first time. If we do have a store, let's just tell it to reload itself so that the grid will refresh. Okay, so just do some pseudocode here, or some comment code here. So let's do if store exists, just load new data, create store. Okay, so how do we know if a store exists? Well, since the store is now part of the app, we can just say if this.defect store, this test if it exists, else. Okay. So if it does not exist, then we're going to create it. And when we create it, we'll bind it to the app, and then that'll be the detection the next time around. Otherwise, we're going to this.defect store dot, I think it's called set filters. We'll look it up in a second. My filters. And then this.defect store.load. This is the trick. We'll look it up here in a second. So let's look at the store's set filters method. So do we have a store in here? Yeah, here's our store, Wasapi data store. And there's going to be a bunch of methods. Under methods, it's going to be too long here, so let's just do set methods, set filter. Sets the filter without loading or locally filtering data sets. We're just going to just sets it, so it actually doesn't do anything, and that's why we call the load. Can I see it from here? Yeah, here we go, there's a load. This will load data into the store via the backing proxy. And the proxy is what the engineers have already created up, wired up to contact Rally, but this will actually tell the store to reload itself. So in the code, it's actually set filter. So we're setting the filters, which every time the user chooses the pull down values, they're going to change, right? So that's why we want to come through and create the new array each time, set those filters on the store, and tell the store to load. All right. There's one more thing here we need to do. So we have a store that's really smart. Well, let's just see what happens. So unexpected token, line 106. Oh, I forgot to end my a brace for my if else. I forgot to write my file. So let's choose one of these and see what happens. Ooh, now we're getting some double grids. Ooh, another grid. That's not what we want. So why am I getting proliferation of grids? So what's going on here? Let's put some debugging. So console.log store exists, else creating store, and then we'll do yeah, let's do that. That'll work. Reload. So first time through, it says creating a store, which is good. But then when I select one of these, it says store exists. So that's fine because the store did exist. So, and if I do it again, I'm getting more grids and it just says store exists. So I only created it once, but it's being called multiple times because I'm doing the pull downs. Well, what am I doing? Let's look at what am I doing when I do a pull down? If I look at the iterations and I do a select, it's calling load data. I go down to load data, and we know we're getting into the create store twice. Oh, interesting. So when the store loads, guess what? Every time the store loads, we have one store, and it's going to keep getting loading and loading and loading and loading. And every time it loads, it calls load grid. And what does load grid do? Creates a brand new grid every single time. We only want to call this method once. This should be called create grid and gets called exactly one time. So let's go up here and rename it to create grid. How do we get it to be created one time? Well, let's put the grid, our brute force method, let's put the grid on the app itself at creation time. Let's make sure we add this.myGrid. So we're going to put the grid onto it, onto the app. And then if does not exist, this.myGrid, and create it. So if at the app level the grid does not exist, so if it's not there, then create it. Otherwise, I don't have to do anything. If the store updates, the grid automatically updates. Okay, now we're not getting any items because the value here of none. So if I change major, so there's major iteration 6, major iteration 6. If I do minor, okay, none, no minors, but if I go to iteration 5, I think I have data there. There we go. Minor iteration 5. Do we have anything in major in iteration 5? We do not. Cosmetic. We do not. Need some better data in there. But the good thing is that, oh, there we go. Major versus minor in iteration. Oh, no, it was iteration 5, I guess. Or crash ADOS. Okay. In any case, we have one grid. Both pull downs are being used, and we're not creating additional grids. So that satisfies the requirement. Let's do a quick recap of how we did that. Two things that we did is that were important is that we put, let's go in, we're in the load data, right? This is where the store stuff is. We put the defect store, here we go, on the app itself. We also put the grid on the app itself. Now you could be nice to someone who's reading this and go up to the top of your app and create like my store, I don't know, undefined, my grid undefined. That way people kind of know that you're sticking stuff up there. It wasn't necessarily required, but that might be kind of nice to do. But going back down the code, that was vital because that's how we test whether they exist or not, and lets us reuse them. So back at load data, the major things we did is we pulled out the filter code. We come down and we test. We test if the store exists, then set the new filters and just load it. Load the existing one. Okay, so reuse the store. That's cool. And we have access to the store that was created the first time through. If we are in the first time through and hasn't been created yet, we come in and we create that store. So we'll create our store with the given set of filters. That's good. When the data loads, this is the other thing we did, is we said, well, the only time we want to create the grid is if the grid doesn't exist. Otherwise, when the grid is created, you give it a store, reference to a store. That tightly couples the two together. So if the store changes, the grid will automatically change. You don't have to do any of that magic yourself. All right. So we're going to leave number 5, call it closed. All right, let's tackle the last one real quick here, some cosmetics, labels and alignments. What you'll notice with the pull downs is that we have them horizontally aligned, and that's great, but it'd be nice if we had some labels on the left telling you what the fields were. So if we go up to our pull downs, let's go to iteration pull down first. Here's our combo box. I'm curious if there's some properties here that I can control some of the cosmetic stuff. So if I go to iteration combo box, and there are a lot of configs. But one of them that I'm interested in is over here called field label. This is the label for the field. And there's label separator and label align, label width, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. But down in the code, I'm just going to add a field label and call it iteration, for lack of a better name. Now, this field label actually, we're going to use the same one, different name, down on the severities, and call this severity. So we added one little property there. Let's go Control R reload. Notice now we have the labels, iteration, and severity. What's cool is you can click on them too. Okay, although the problem is that there's too much space in there. So I did notice earlier they had a in the documentation for field label, they had this thing I saw, label align. So this is label align controls the position and alignment of the field label. Great, and you can set it to left, top, or right. So this one's called what? Label align. So let's put it down here. Label align, right. Copy that. Go up to iteration. Paste there, Control R reload, and now we can see that the labels are on the right, sort of mushed over to the right a little bit. That's kind of nice. Now one thing I'm noticing is that the name in the iteration here is kind of squished. It's almost as if the whole top up there is kind of squished in. So if we go and we look at in the docs under iteration combo box, and we look under configs, I'm guessing there's probably something called width. And it turns out there are 6 that match, and there is a width. In fact, this is the width of the component in pixels, and it defaults to 210. I suspect that our iteration pull down here, that 210, is probably causing it to be too short. So let's come into our iteration combo box here. I'll just put a width, I don't know, I'm just going to guess 300. Refresh. And here we have our iteration pull down is now visible. We have an iteration pull down. We have a severity pull down. We have a single grid where if you change the value of either of these, it will force loading the grid of defects, matching the severity and the iteration that the user has chosen. Ladies and gentlemen, and children of all coding ages, we have now satisfied our requirement for this video, making an interactive grid. I hope you have found this entertaining, instructive, and useful. So, a couple of things. Now that I'm done with my code, I would likely take a look at Git. I have a bunch of files that are modified. I'm not going to do this at the moment, but I would do like git add dot, I'll put that there, and then I would do git commit finished or added pull downs and defect, etc. Okay, get that up, and then and git push. Okay, push it all to get all my changes up into the cloud. I will add this example code into the getting started GitHub repository so you can get access to the source code. Before we end, let's take a quick look at the actual source code itself. This was our app here. And I want to point out a couple of things that we did that were of interest. One is in our launch, we created a pull-down container. We added that pull-down container to the app. Notice that we also created that pull-down container on the app. So we're kind of registering the component at the app level, and we added that to the container of the app. We added the field labels and modified the widths of our combo boxes. That was cool. Load severities. Let's see. When we created those combo boxes, we like the severity when we added it to the pull-down container, not the app container. So we're kind of nesting. In load data, we sniffed out the values in the pull-downs because we had access to the combo boxes. We got those off of the app itself. Using this. Let's see, we pulled the filters out so they could run, we can create them every time, but then we determined whether we were going to reuse the store and set the filters and reload versus creating a brand new store. And then when we created the store, we figured out if we had to create the grid on the first time or not by testing against the value of the grid that was bound to the actual app itself with this. There was a lot of code. A lot of experimenting, so we had some debugging, ran into some errors. So while this was a longer video than I was hoping, it certainly, I hope, gave you some insight into creating and experimenting with the XJS the platform, JavaScript in general, the Rally components, and then also using the tools that we have to develop and test and debug. All right, you made it this far, so I'm finally going to explain what the sign above me is. First, I have something to admit. This session was long, and I appreciate your patience getting through it. But in the same way that doing long division is long and it's manual, it's arduous, painful, this session was intended to walk through and brute force as explicit as possible, showing you how to just get through the basics of the JavaScript language, the X framework, the Rally components, and really see in longhand how to get things working. What I'm about to say is that I would probably, half of the patterns that we used in this app, I would probably not use in a real app. But in order to understand why you'd use things like the X type, the shorthand notation, it's important to understand why, what it means to fully explicitly create these components. If you just start looking at examples and copying, pasting code, not knowing why they work, I don't think there's a lot of value in that. So I have two boys, they're 3 and 5, and I started going through Singapore math workbooks with them. And it's interesting to look up Singapore math online, but basically the notion there is that with kids and teaching them math concepts, it's really important to focus on fewer things and have higher quality. So what I'd like to do is, instead of moving on to something like charts, which I know people are excited about, or the lookback API, and just going in terms of like breadth, using the concepts from Singapore math, I'd like to focus on really dialing in this video session, getting really good at grids. Now, grids by themselves are going to be really powerful, so it's not a waste by any means. But I want to use the notion of the grid and get really good at JavaScript X and the Rally components, and use grids as that sort of anchor point, if you will, for us to get really solid. And by doing that, hopefully we'll learn really good patterns in how we develop apps, so that when you do go off and do some of the more advanced aspects of the Rally platform and the Rally SDK, you'll carry along those patterns in your tool belt. So the next video, we're going to refactor this grid and show some better patterns. There are some things I like in this one, so I'm not suggesting that we did everything wrong, but I'll show you a cleaner way to do several things. As for the little note up there, it says tactical nuclear penguin 32%. along the bottom it says Rally App Development Meeting Room. So there are rooms that are named with beers in a certain location. And somehow myself and Charles Ferenchek, who's the developer advocate at Rally for our platform, we found ourselves in Iceland ordering or trying to order this beer. It turns out, long story short, that while it's pretty unique and having 32% and sort of that's interesting, never knew beer could be that like that. We should just try it. We learned the reason we didn't get it is we learned, and thankfully it wasn't the it was like $160 for like the single bottle. But anyway, so it was a pretty funny incident, and so it's been sort of the name that we use for the Rally App Development Room. If you're coining your room names by beer names, that one has sort of a funny story behind it. I drew that up one day. I was in the Amsterdam office, for Rally Software, and drew that up, and it's been kind of with me this whole time. It's our Rally App Development room name. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for sticking along this far, and I'll see you in the next one.